Welcome back. Right now we are going to focus our attention on the Solarwinds data breach. This was the huge data breach that happened with many government agencies and much, much more, unfortunately. Here to tell us why it matters, why we need to be concerned, and what we can do is Earl, Foote, and Tara Anderson from Nexus IT. We're so thankful they're both with us today. In fact, Earl, let's start with you. Tell me a little bit of a background in case people aren't exactly aware of what happened with this enormous data breach.
Yeah, good morning, Christine, and thank you for having us on this morning. Actually, I'm going to defer this question, the background, to Tara, and I would like to maybe get into some of the more specifics about what's happened here, but this is a really interesting, intriguing situation. Anyways, Tara, if you don't mind.
No, I don't mind a bit. Thanks for turning it on over to me, Earl. As CEO and founder of Nexus IT, I'm sure he'll answer more of the intricate questions that you might have. But Christine, essentially, it's important to maybe reframe the story just a little bit. Instead of calling it a breach, we're going to call it an attack, because in all sense of the word, an attack is what it was, and continues possibly to be. A breach would be a little less scary in our opinions. But an attack that has been traced back to what's been called a group called Cozy Bear, SCP-129, which is believed to be funded by the Russian government, the SVR. It infiltrated our federal government and many of the Fortune 500 organizations here in the US and even abroad through a supply chain attack, actually through the vector Solarwinds, which is probably the name that you've heard most through the media. Solarwinds is out of Austin, Texas. They have a business solution. That business solution, Orion, provides network monitoring for organizations, in the private sector and the federal government. Right now, it's believed that 18,000 businesses were infected, and many of these, again, were federal government agencies.
And the more we hear about this attack, the more alarming it becomes. So I'm curious, Tara, about what we can do. What exactly do we need to know as individuals? How is it affecting us?
Sorry, was that the...
Go ahead, Earl. No, you got it.
Okay. Very good. And the interesting thing to understand here is that unfortunately, SolarWinds, is a solution that's supposed to help IT departments detect this type of scenario or attack, and actually it was the software was used and weaponized. This group, Cozy Bear, they gained access into the software distribution platform, or in other words, the automatic updating platform of SolarWinds. And they were in there for several months before they actually weaponized the software updates that were being rolled out to include malware that would allow them access, into all of these networks across the globe. And unfortunately, again, the software that's supposed to help IT departments detect and avoid this type of stuff was actually used as the vector to enable these massive hacks. In terms of your question there, Christine, the reality is, as common consumers or everyday users in our office environments, in this scenario, there isn't much we could do, right? The unfortunate reality is most breaches now, 90% plus of breaches involve human interaction doing something wrong, clicking on an email or an attachment or a link somewhere that they should not. And that's what leads to the majority of breaches, but that is not the scenario here. In this scenario, there was a vulnerability, and frankly, there's significant amounts of concern around negligence around the provider, SolarWinds, and the federal government in this case. Very interestingly, we did not have any current cybersecurity directors or coordinators at any level of the federal government over the past 18 to 36 months. They had been dismissed, they had been run off, and had never been replaced. There was supposed to be a director at the CISA level, a director in the White House, a director in the Senate, and there were no individuals at the federal government level over the past 18 to 36 months that have been overseeing the federal government's security posture and practices. And honestly, this is something that probably should have been detected far sooner. And something should have been done with it. I don't know that we've mentioned yet, but this breach or this attack was active and live for more than 9 months. And at this point, the reality is the government is still scrambling to figure out the entire extent of the attack, and if there are still, potentially what looks like Russian hackers that have access to federal government systems. The same thing is happening on the private sector side. Businesses trying to figure out just how extensive this has been, and if they are possibly still breached and still have, hackers actively monitoring their systems. We do know that that data has been exfiltrated. Forensics have shown that the hackers have removed data not only from corporate Fortune 500 companies, but from our federal government and from departments that should not be breached. The Department of Defense, the majority of our military services, the State Department, the Federal Reserve, NASA, the CDC, the NSA. The list goes on. Honestly, it's a little scary. The situation is.
It absolutely is. In fact, you've likened this to strategic warfare and classic espionage, and you sent me a list of all of the companies that have been affected, and it is enormous, way more than I would have thought. And I wonder if during a more traditional year, we would have heard more about this within the news, but it's been such a busy news cycle that it's been a little bit under the radar for most Americans.
Yeah, maybe Tara can talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that can be attributed to a few things. The firing of Chris Krebs in November. Chris Krebs actually did oversee the CISA department, which is aimed to be kind of the hub between the private sector and the government. With the election happening during that time, the claims of voter fraud and issues with the actual election, he was fired over Twitter actually at that time. So there was a lot of noise. You're correct about that. There's many attributions really when it comes down to why it was actually undetected, because again, it was 9 full months. They went in there actually very discreetly. It's a very sophisticated and well-funded organization that really would just attach like a small snippet of code where the network security teams, when they monitored outgoing traffic, it looked like actual code. Nothing looked suspicious there. And they actually waited at least 2 weeks before deploying it. So, again, like Earl said, Solarwinds product Orion is designed as a solution to cybercrime. It's to protect infrastructures. So it's a well-trusted source. It was deployed onto multiple systems, and then it sat there. So that it sat there, and then it looked for opportunities to infect computers that were not protected. So it would look for antivirus, and it would avoid that. So it's an excellent hider. It would be extremely hard to detect. Even the most sophisticated cybersecurity experts admit that this was a really tough one, mostly because of the patience they had. They had a lot of patience. They went out, they infected, and they sat and they waited. And then it was this very discreet information, and they would pull it very slowly over the course of 8 or 9 months. So couple that with the fact that, yes, as a nation, we've had a lot going on, obviously with the pandemic, with the election, there are many different factors in this. And then again, the gaps in the government, in these high level security seats, even the gaps at SolarWinds, at that time, they didn't have a CISO or anyone in the higher levels of cybersecurity there as well. Although they had been warned several times by experts, even inside experts on their teams, that they were vulnerable for several years. Even passwords were being sold out on the dark web, actually, and they were notified of a few of those things. And really, I don't want to say they refused to do anything about it, but maybe they didn't take the action that we would expect. So multiple nuances there. But again, at the end of the day, it's a really bad thing for our country. We are calling it espionage, because right now they're stealing data. They're spying internally via our infrastructure. It's still unclear what they're going to do with that data. And that, I think, is the scariest thing, is once they have this data, are they going to act out on the data? I've read accounts of many different security experts saying it's a slow Pearl Harbor. They're circling the harbor potentially. And many different experts are just kind of standing back and waiting to see what's next.
In fact, the extent of this attack is not even completely known. So Earl, I'm going to give you the last word. I know we could keep talking about this. It's fascinating, but also very scary. So much of what we do, almost everything that we do, is online for people that use their banking, use their work, your students, everything is happening. And it concerns us when we think about cyber warfare, of everything getting taken or shut down. So really, what do we need to know? What is our takeaway here?
For me, I think, as the average consumer or the average office worker, I would just recommend everybody have a significantly heightened perspective when it comes to cybersecurity and your day-to-day interactions with technology. Educate yourselves, educate your teams about what to look for to protect you and your organization. Be careful, be suspicious, and in the end, try to make good choices when you're dealing with data day in and day out. Particularly, anything that comes from a source that you're not 100% aware of. Attachments, links, whether those are in emails, on websites, whatever it might be. Just be cautious, about how you interact with your technology. And in the end, it remains, as Tara said, it remains to be seen what's going to happen with this, right? Of course, our imaginations can run wild, but when a potentially malicious nation state gains access to all of our most intimate government secrets and even militaristic information, plans, whatever those might be, certainly the imagination should run wild, and we can imagine what might happen. We may, in the coming months and years, we may find out things about our federal government that none of us could have ever imagined. We may find out things, secrets that have been held for a long time, but we'll see what happens down the road. Hopefully, maybe nothing. But I would imagine that the objective behind infiltrating these systems and exfiltrating all of the data is probably fairly nefarious.
Well, thank you so much, Earl Foote and Tara Anderson, for joining us today, breaking this important issue down for us with this cyber attack that has happened recently that we're still finding more and more about. I know that we will continue talking about this on our show in future interviews. You can head to Nexus IT online to find out more about their company. Any help that you need, any security concerns that you have for yourself, for your business, make sure to reach out to Nexus IT. We'll be back with more right after this.